So if you go back to like the 1950s, people were actually buying these giant clunky hypnopedia machines.
Oh, yeah, those things are wild.
Right. Just completely convinced that if they played a spinning record right next to their pillow, they could just, magically learn a whole new language while they slept.
Just wake up fluent in French.
Exactly. And the crazy thing is, you fast forward to today and you log on to YouTube, and there are literally thousands of videos with, millions of views.
Oh, tens of millions, easily.
Yeah. And they have this soft background rain and whispering voices, and they're promising the exact same thing. Like, become fluent in Spanish or learn complex English grammar, all while you're completely unconscious.
It's a massive industry, and it really taps into this super fundamental, very human desire. We want to bypass the awkward, exhausting phase of learning.
Oh, 100%, the clunky phase.
Right. We just want the result without the cognitive friction. We want a magic button.
We really do. And it's not just the sleep learning thing either. The internet is just an absolute minefield of shortcuts and, these language learning hacks.
Oh, absolutely.
If you're out there trying to learn a language right now, it is just incredibly difficult to figure out what actually works and what is basically modern-day snake oil.
It's overwhelming.
So that's what we're doing today. We are going to cut through all of that noise.
Mm.
We've gathered this really fascinating stack of research for this deep dive. We have a rigorous neuroscience study on binaural beats from the Center for Brain Health down at UT Dallas.
That one is so cool.
It really is. Plus, we've got a Swiss study on sleep and memory and some really comprehensive guides on like DIY immersion and solo conversation practice.
Yeah, and our goal here is to take all that science and basically debunk 3 of the biggest, most persistent and honestly kind of discouraging myths in the language learning world.
Right, because they really hold people back.
They do. So we're looking at the idea that you can learn grammar in your sleep, the belief that you have to actually travel abroad to truly immerse yourself, and this really common misconception that without a native speaking partner, you're just never going to reach fluency.
Okay, let's start with that first one, because the sleep myth is literally everywhere. I was looking at the YouTube data from our research, and channels like Zen English are pulling in millions of views with titles like Learn English While Sleeping, 8 hours.
Oh, I've seen those.
And your immediate reaction is to just, dismiss it entirely as a total scam. But based on that Swiss study in our stack, it seems like there's actually a biological mechanism at play here, right? Even if the YouTubers are maybe misinterpreting it.
There is, yeah, a very real mechanism. But to understand it, we have to look at what the brain is actually doing when we transition into deep sleep.
Okay, lay it on me.
So it is not powering down. That's a huge myth. It's actually shifting into this highly active administrative mode.
Like a librarian or something.
It's exactly like a librarian. Throughout the day, your hippocampus is rapidly encoding all this new information, vocabulary, words, faces, directions to the new coffee shop.
Right.
But this is short-term storage. It's super fragile. So during sleep, specifically during slow-wave sleep, the brain essentially replays these new memories and transfers them over to the neocortex for long-term storage.
Okay, so that's the whole memory consolidation process.
That's it. And the Swiss study tested this by seeing if they could, manipulate that sorting process.
Wait, how do you manipulate someone's brain while they're sleeping?
Well, the researchers took a group of German speakers who were learning Dutch, and they had them study a set of vocabulary words during the day.
Okay.
Then, when the participants went to sleep, the researchers softly played the audio of some of those exact same Dutch words back to them during that slow-wave sleep phase.
Okay, what happened?
When they woke up, their recall for the words played during the night was significantly better than the words that weren't played at all.
Oh, wow. Because the brain heard the audio cue, recognized that fragile memory from earlier in the day, and basically just prioritized it for the long-term storage.
Precisely. It flagged it as important. But, and this is the critical distinction that completely dismantles the YouTube myth, they only improved on words they had already actively studied while awake.
Oh.
Yeah. When the researchers tried playing brand new words to the sleeping participants, there was zero learning. Literally none.
Ah. So it's not like downloading a new software program into your brain. It's more like caching data. Like you have to actually open the files and work on them while you're awake.
Yes.
And then sleep, just make sure you don't lose your progress when you reboot.
That is the perfect analogy. Sleep is the save button, not the download button. And this limitation applies even more rigidly to grammar.
Right, because grammar isn't just memorizing a single word.
Exactly. You cannot learn syntax or grammar rules while unconscious. Grammar requires the awake, conscious brain to actively compare different structures, notice subtle nuances built syntactic trees.
So if you play a complex new grammar rule to a sleeping brain, what happens?
It just processes it as ambient background noise. It does nothing.
Wow. Okay, so sleep learning from scratch is a bust. But the research on audio and the brain doesn't stop at sleep? Because that University of Texas at Dallas study in our stack looked at something called binaural beats.
Oh, this one is fascinating.
Yeah, specifically 18 hertz beta binaural beats. And they were playing these while people were awake. And they found a measurable improvement in language processing, right?
They did. And the mechanics of how this works are just super cool. So first, let's just clarify what a binaural beat actually is.
Yeah, please, because it sounds like sci-fi.
It's basically an auditory illusion. If you play a 400 hertz tone in your left ear and a 418 hertz tone in your right ear, your brain registers the difference between the two, which is 18 hertz, and it literally creates a third phantom beat inside your head.
That is wild. And 18 hertz falls into the beta frequency range, which I think is associated with like active alert concentration.
You got it. So the researchers had 60 healthy adults listen to these 18 hertz beats embedded in some background music while they were doing language tasks.
Okay.
And they found that the participants had significantly improved accuracy and response times when they were processing something called object relative clauses.
Okay, hold on. Object relative clauses. I feel like I definitely need a quick grammar refresher on that one. What's that?
Sure. An object relative clause is just a complex sentence structure where the object of the sentence actually comes before the verb in the clause.
Give me an example.
So instead of a simple sentence like, the boy threw the ball,
Right.
an object relative clause would be the ball that the boy threw.
Ah, okay, I see. Because it forces your brain to hold the ball in your working memory while you wait for the rest of the sentence to unfold, just to figure out what actually happened to it.
Exactly. It's computationally heavy for the brain. It takes work. So what the UTD study suggests is that those 18 hertz beats induce something called neural entrainment.
Neural entrainment.
Right. Your brain waves essentially sync up with the rhythm of the beat. And this synchronization acts like a metronome for your neural networks, making the communication between the different parts of the brain a lot more efficient.
Okay, so if I'm translating that into a mechanical analogy,
Let's hear it.
it's like tuning a radio dial. So the language task is the radio station, and the complex grammar is creating static. The binaural beats aren't teaching you the lyrics to the song that's playing, but they fine-tune the frequency so the static drops away and you can hear the lyrics you already know much more clearly.
I love that. Yes, that's exactly what's happening. It reduces the processing burden.
Okay.
The beats aren't teaching you new vocabulary or grammar from scratch. They are optimizing your working memory and focus so that you can just process complex operations more efficiently.
So it's a tool for focus. It's not a substitute for the hard work of learning.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You still have to do the work.
Which perfectly sets up our next major hurdle. Because if we accept that our unconscious brain can only save what we've already actively practiced, and auditory tricks only help optimize our focus, right? It really begs the question, how do we get enough high-quality active practice? And the traditional answer to this has always been, the plane ticket fallacy.
Oh, the idea that you have to just uproot your life and move to a foreign country to achieve true immersion.
Exactly. And it's honestly one of the most discouraging myths out there.
Yeah.
Because it makes fluency feel like this luxury reserved for people with unlimited time and money.
It really does. But the immersion guides we analyzed introduce this concept of DIY immersion.
Yeah, at-home immersion.
Right. The core philosophy is that immersion is not a geographic location. It is a carefully curated environment.
I love that phrasing.
You don't need to change your coordinates. You just need to reshape the digital and physical spaces that you already inhabit.
So let's break down the mechanics of how that actually rewires the brain. Let's start with the L1 to L2 device switch. L1 being your native language, L2 being your target language.
Right.
The guide basically suggests changing the operating system on your phone, your laptop, your social media accounts entirely into the new language.
Yeah, and the psychology behind this is rooted in building automaticity.
Okay, explain that.
Well, when you interact with your phone, you aren't usually reading the text deeply, right? You're navigating by habit, context, and visual cues.
Yeah, mostly muscle memory at this point.
Exactly. So if you change your phone to Spanish and the battery icon turns red with a low battery warning, your brain doesn't have to look up the Spanish words. The context tells you what it means instantly.
Because your brain is fundamentally lazy
Right.
in a good way. It wants to predict the outcome.
Yes.
So instead of that exhausting process of seeing the Spanish word, translating it to English in your head, and then understanding the concept, you just bypass English completely.
You link the Spanish phrase directly to the concept of a dying battery.
That makes total sense.
You are forcing the brain to create direct neural pathways to the target language. Over hundreds of micro-interactions a day, swiping to unlock, deleting an email, clicking a notification, those pathways become incredibly thick and fast.
And automaticity.
That is automaticity.
But I do have to push back a little bit here.
Okay, go for it.
If I change my entire phone to Mandarin, right?
Mhm.
And I need to order an Uber in a rush, or, God forbid, navigate my banking app, I'm going to panic.
Oh, 100%.
That level of friction just seems like a recipe for quitting by day 3.
And that is a very common pitfall. People try to do too much. The
Right.
fix that the guides emphasize is layering.
Layering, right?
You do not change your entire digital ecosystem on day one. You start with low-stakes environments. So change the language on your weather app.
Oh, that's smart.
The context is super obvious. There's a picture of a cloud and a number. You learn the word for cloudy or rain with literally zero stress. Then 2 weeks later, change your calendar app. It's about progressive overload, just like weightlifting. You slowly increase the cognitive demand as your capacity grows.
Okay, that makes it so much more approachable. Now, another physical tactic the guide suggests is using visual labels around the house.
Yeah.
But there's a very specific nuance here that I thought was interesting.
The phrases. Right.
Yeah. They stress that you shouldn't just put a sticky note on a door that says the word door, because that's inefficient.
Right, because isolated vocabulary words are rarely how we actually use language. The brain needs context.
Exactly.
If you just memorize the word door, your brain treats it like a static piece of trivia. The guide suggests using action verbs and full microphrases.
So instead of a note that says door, you write a note that says close the door quietly.
Yes, instead of mug, you write wash the mug with hot water.
That completely reorients how I view vocabulary building.
Mm-hmm.
Because you are feeding the brain these pre-assembled syntactic trees. Every single time you grab your coffee mug, you are reading a verb, an article, a noun, and a prepositional phrase, all working together.
And you are tying the physical action to the language. Motor movement, combined with language processing, creates incredibly strong memory encoding.
Wow. Okay, so the final piece of DIY immersion is passive listening.
Right.
This is playing foreign language podcasts or YouTube videos like the 100 Everyday English Conversation questions from our sources, just having it in the background while you cook or commute. But if I'm not actively paying attention to the words, what is that actually achieving mechanically?
It attacks a very specific problem, which is the translation reflex.
Oh, yeah. The urge to translate everything.
Exactly. When adult learners hear a foreign language, their immediate instinct is to try and translate every single word in real time.
Which is exhausting.
It's so exhausting, and it usually causes them to just lose the thread of the conversation immediately. So passive listening trains your brain to let go of that reflex.
So it's less about vocabulary acquisition and more about getting comfortable with the ambiguity of not knowing every word.
Yes, and absorbing the prosody,
Prosody.
the music of the language. Because every language has a unique rhythm, pitch, and pattern of pauses.
Right. French sounds very different from Japanese in its flow.
Exactly. By having it playing in the background, your brain's auditory processing centers begin to map those acoustic patterns. It starts to recognize where words begin and end.
Okay.
So the language stops sounding like a continuous, intimidating stream of noise and starts feeling familiar. You are essentially building a native language acoustic system in the background.
Which is the perfect foundation for our final hurdle. Because having your phone in French and listening to podcasts while you cook is fantastic for input.
It's great. It builds comprehension.
But eventually you have to actually open your mouth and speak.
The scary part?
The scariest part. And the immediate fear anyone has when talking to an AI or to themselves in an empty room is that they are just permanently engraving their own terrible grammar mistakes.
Yeah.
The myth is that without a native speaker constantly correcting you, fluency is impossible.
It really is the final boss of language myths. Look, input builds your passive library, but output The physical act of speaking is what builds conversational reflexes.
Right.
And the idea that you must have a partner to build those reflexes is scientifically flawed. Solo output is entirely possible and highly effective if you understand how to bypass the analytical brain and target the motor skills.
Okay, so the guides offer this technique called the shadow sprint that perfectly illustrates this.
Oh, I love the shadow sprint.
It's so clever. So the instructions are to pick a very short, like 15 to 30-second audio clip of a native speaker. You listen, you pause, and then you repeat it out loud, trying to perfectly mimic their exact rhythm, pitch, and intonation.
Right.
And the research claims this smooths out an accent faster than any traditional pronunciation drill.
It really does. And the mechanics of why that works are crucial to understand. When you do traditional pronunciation drills, you are using the analytical part of your brain.
Thinking about where your tongue is going.
Exactly. You are overthinking tongue placement and vocal cord vibration. Shadowing bypasses all of that. It treats speaking as a purely motor function, kind of like learning a dance routine.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
You are training your ear to hear a frequency and your mouth muscles to immediately replicate it.
Pure muscle memory. The guide gave a really great example of using this to distinguish tricky vowel sounds, like the difference between ship and sheep or cat and cut.
Those are tough ones.
They really are.
Yeah.
But if you shadow a native speaker saying those words rapidly in a sentence, you stop overthinking the vowel and just mimic the shape of the sound.
Exactly. And you can layer this with something called the LRS cycle.
LRS cycle, what does that stand for?
Listen, repeat, summarize.
Ah,
So you shadow a short clip to get the motor pattern down, and then you force yourself to summarize what you just heard out loud in your own words. It bridges the gap between mimicry and spontaneous thought.
okay, but what about the unpredictability of a real conversation? Because the guides heavily advocate for using AI now, right?
They do.
Utilizing apps like Ablano or even just ChatGPT's voice function to role-play real-world scenarios. But they suggest keeping it to just 8 to 12 minutes a day. Why such a short window?
Because of cognitive load theory.
Okay, break that down for me.
When you are in a live, unpredictable conversation in a new language, your brain is utilizing an enormous amount of mental RAM.
I can imagine.
You are translating input, searching your memory for vocabulary, applying grammar rules to your output, and trying to read social cues all simultaneously.
It's completely overwhelming.
It is cognitively depleting. So, 8 to 12 minutes of intense, simulated role play, like pretending to return a defective item to a store or explaining a dietary restriction to a waiter, that is the sweet spot.
It challenges the brain without causing fatigue and frustration.
Exactly.
Okay, so if the mental RAM is maxed out during a conversation, how do we lighten that load? Like, how do we make the output faster so we don't stall out?
The secret is chunking.
Chunking.
Yes. Instead of trying to build every single sentence from scratch, word by word, and applying grammar rules like a math equation, you memorize flexible frames.
Like chunks of language.
Exactly. Large chunks of language that you treat as a single unit.
Like saying, from my perspective.
Right.
Or what I mean is, or let me rephrase that.
Precisely. If you know the chunk from my perspective, you do not need to think about the preposition, the pronoun, or the noun.
Right, you don't build it, you just drop it in.
You deploy the entire phrase as a pre-packaged reflex. This frees up crucial working memory, that mental RAM we talked about, so you can focus on the complex part of the sentence that comes next.
Wow.
Native speakers use chunks constantly. It's actually what makes speech fluid.
That is incredibly practical. But it still leaves the anxiety of self-correction, right? Like, if I'm role-playing with an AI or summarizing audio out loud by myself, how do I ensure I'm not just reinforcing really bad habits?
That's the million-dollar question. And the guides offer a two-pronged approach to this. First, you implement a mistake-to-lesson log.
Okay, how does that work?
When you do a short AI role play and the AI gives you feedback on an error, you don't just read it and close the app. You extract the core rule and you log it simply.
Oh, I see.
For instance, I used make instead of do for this idiom. You
Right.
literally write it down. The physical act of logging the mistake interrupts the habituation process.
You're basically forcing the brain to consciously acknowledge the error so it doesn't become a subconscious reflex.
Exactly. And the second method is the 60-second monologue recording.
Oh boy, okay.
Once a week, you record yourself speaking unscripted for 1 minute on a simple prompt, like what I cooked for dinner last night or my plans for the weekend.
I can already feel people cringing. Nobody likes listening to the sound of their own recorded voice,
It's the worst.
let alone in a language they're struggling to learn.
I know, it is universally uncomfortable. But it is the most objective data you can gather.
Right, because the goal isn't to judge your voice.
No, it's to measure mechanical progress over time. If you listen to your monologue from week 1 and then you compare it to week 4, you aren't listening for perfection.
What are you listening for?
You are listening for specific metrics. Did you pause less between words? Did you use a wider variety of verbs? Did you successfully deploy one of those language chunks you memorized?
Wow. Okay. So you are acting as your own auditor.
Yes.
You get to hear the physical evidence that your neural pathways are getting faster, which builds the confidence required to eventually step into a real conversation with an actual human being.
Exactly. It proves that the solo practice is yielding tangible structural improvements in your output.
This has been a massive paradigm shift. I mean, if we pull all of these threads together, the architecture of language learning looks completely different than those myths we started with.
Totally different.
You absolutely cannot skip the line by trying to learn grammar from scratch while you sleep. Sleep is a caching mechanism. It's the biological process that takes the hard, awake work of the day and secures it in long-term memory.
Right.
And binaural beats might help tune out the static to improve your focus, but you still have to do the heavy lifting of active processing.
And doing that heavy lifting doesn't require a plane ticket.
No.
By embracing DIY immersion, strategically shifting your digital devices to the target language, building action-oriented context around your physical environment, and using passive listening to map the acoustic rhythms of the language, you can force your brain to build automaticity and bypass the exhausting translation reflex.
And finally, you actually have the power to build true conversational reflexes completely solo.
Which is so empowering.
Through techniques like the shadow sprint to build that motor muscle memory, cognitive chunking to free up mental RAM, and those short AI role plays combined with weekly audio audits, you can achieve fluency without ever waiting for a conversation partner,
It just moves the locus of control entirely back to the learner. You're in charge.
which is amazing.
But before we wrap up, there is one final, incredibly fascinating detail buried in the research on memory and learning that we haven't touched on yet.
Oh, hit me. What is it?
It turns out that the simple physical act of smiling while you are engaging with the target language measurably improves your brain's ability to retain the information.
Wait, really? Just the motor movement of smiling changes the memory encoding? How does that even work?
It's tied to the affective filter in psychology. When you smile, even if it's kind of forced initially, it signals to your nervous system that you are in a safe, low-threat environment.
Okay.
This lowers cortisol levels and releases dopamine, which makes the hippocampus, the manual center we talked about earlier, way more receptive to encoding new data.
So when we are stressed or frustrated or punishing ourselves for making a mistake, the brain literally tightens up and rejects new information.
Exactly. Positive affect creates a biochemical environment that is optimized for learning.
So approaching the process with a sense of play, rather than a sense of, like, grueling academic punishment, is actually a biological imperative for success.
It really is.
That is a brilliant place to leave it. Think about the emotional state you bring to your learning. Are you frustrated, or are you giving your brain the grace and the neurochemical signals it needs to actually absorb the material? Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the real mechanics of language acquisition. We challenge you to go change the language on your weather app, write an action label for your coffee mug, and most importantly, physically smile the next time you sit down to practice. We will catch you on the next one.